Types of arrays. There are what are known as parallel arrays, where you have two arrays that have corresponding elements. You have array 1 and array 2. One could be the name of a student, while the others could be a grade. Okay, and you run them parallel to one another to where you can match them up to know which student made what grade for a particular assignment. Another, what's known as a two-dimensional array. Okay, here the syntax for it would be data types such as int, the name of the array, and then you have an int x1 and an x2, where the first one indicates your rows and the second your columns. And then you have what's known as a multi-dimensional array. And like before, it's data type, name of array, and then you have all your different variables listed here. Let's look at an example. Okay, so here we have a two-dimensional array with a parallel array. I've included the header file for string. I've got my constant number of houses and number of categories. I have an enumerator here. I declared an enumerator of house type. This is going to help our code read better. And I use the house type to declare a house type of name row. Same thing with category. Okay, named the category type column. So it's going to be Gryffindor's rows, category as columns, and what's going to happen is we're going to have values for each of the houses to determine who wins the house cup at the end of the year, based upon honesty, integrity, attendance, academics, and Quidditch. Here's my two-dimensional array. House cup, number of houses and categories, so my rows and columns for two-dimensional arrays, properly labeled here just to make things easier. And an int sum. This is going to be used later to calculate the different scores for the categories. Here's my string, name houses, number of houses. I'm going to initialize this string here, Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, Hufflepuff, because this is my parallel array for me to print out later. I can't just print out my enumeration because enumerations can only be printed out indirectly. And using a string is easier than using the things that we've talked about earlier, such as a switch or if statements. Here I'm showing you how to assign values, okay, to a particular element. So here for House Cup, for all of Gryffindor, I just manually assigned it for honesty, integrity, attendance, academics, and Quidditch. Here are the values. And in here for Ravenclaw, I started using row equals Ravenclaw. Now that the computer knows rows, I'm going to have the end user enter in the column values for honesty, integrity, attendance, academics, and Quidditch by using a for statement. For column, honesty is less than equal to Quidditch, increase by 1. CN, house cup, row, column, where row is static. So if you look back up here at our enumeration for column, honesty is the first value or element and ends in Quidditch. Starts at honesty and then less than equals to Quidditch, ends in Quidditch, and then you need to use the static cast operator to increase it by 1. Okay, so now it looks easier than just seeing all these numbers. Less of a chance of out of bounds. Did the same thing for Slytherin, Hufflepuff, and then down here, this is for me to print out the results. For row equals Gryffindor, less than equal to Hufflepuff, which means, you see here in my rows, less than equal to Hufflepuff means I'm going to go through and cycle through the entire row and cycle through the entire columns, and I'm going to add them up here through sum equals sum plus house cup row column. See out sum of, and here's my parallel array. Name houses, row, equals to sum. Let's go ahead and run this. Enter in the points for honesty, integrity, attendance, academics, and Quidditch for Ravenclaw. We're going to go ahead and say 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. Slytherin, Hufflepuff, and remember we manually did it for Gryffindor, so therefore it does the calculation as so. Arrays and functions. Functions are passed by reference only, so therefore in your formal parameter you won't need to use the and sign with arrays because there's no value or reference. Functions cannot return a value of type array because we can't return aggregate data. All right, you only return a data, or if you're using reference only, if you recall the types of reference only functions that we've used in the past, you won't violate the aggregate issue, and we'll have an example to show you shortly. In regards to formal parameters with a one-dimensional array, all right, the size of the array is omitted. In a two-dimensional array, you must specify the size of the columns. In a multi-dimensional array, only the first dimension can be omitted. So here's our two-dimensional array. All right, so you can omit the very first row, and then here with a multi-dimensional, you can omit this, but everything else must be specified in your function. Let's look at an example. So here's a simple one-dimensional array function. Functions, or two functions that are one-dimensional. We have constant int number of houses, string houses, number of houses. Here are our prototypes for the arrays. So let's go ahead and look at the arrays. Void initialize array, string list, int list size. Okay, so the size of the array is omitted in a one-dimensional array, as we mentioned earlier. We do mention the number of elements, since the number of elements might be less than the size of the array. So in our function here, we can omit the size here, but we need to let the function know how many elements we're going to process. For instance, you can have so many students in a class, but the students over time may drop. So therefore, you must list the size, the number of current students in the class. All right, and the same thing here for the print array. So here in this example here, I'm going to say initialize array houses, which is up here. All right, number of houses 4. So what's being passed? The array 4. And then this for loop is going to run cn. What that tells you immediately is the end user is going to enter in Hogwarts houses. Okay, print array houses, number of houses. Again, the array now is activated with list size 4 being passed, and then it's going to list what the end user inputted. So let's go ahead and run this. Please enter in Hogwarts houses. I need to scroll up just so I can remember what Hogwarts houses are. Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, and Hufflepuff. There you go. If you recall, this was the exact example that we did at the very beginning of our lecture, and now we're using arrays and functions to do the exact same thing. We talked about arrays today. The definition and structure, basically arrays are made up of simple data types in which all the data types are of the same data type, or all the data is of the same data type, such as data type int and all the different values within it. All right, in terms of its index, let's say the int is called score. All right, it starts at 0. It starts at 0. All right, and you want it to be in bounds, meaning that your values are between 0 and an array size minus 1. You don't want it to be out of bounds, because then you could get weird data outside of your contiguous memory space. Some restrictions again, remember there are no aggregate operations. If you do anything with arrays, it must be done one element at a time. We talked about the different types of arrays, from parallel, two-dimensional to multi-dimensional. And we talked about how arrays can be used in functions. Remember, we use functions so that not everything is up in main, and specifically that these functions are passed by reference only. And we talked about all the details in terms of what we can omit in terms of the values in our indexes. That's it on arrays.